Podcasting from the beautiful state of Maine, welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast, the show that focuses on identifying and developing the skills and behaviors that will inspire, empower, and compel others to follow your lead. Listen as Patrick's guests talk about the powerful leadership approaches they have identified and developed, which are vital for leading in today's challenging times. These are the same approaches that will positively impact you as a leader too. Learning from Leaders provides the right balance of leadership research with real-world scenarios, making it easy for you to rise above your best. All right, let's start the show.
Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Verno, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Learning from Leaders. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking to leadership expert Don Schmincke, who is also a best-selling author and a global speaker. And while he talks on many topics around business and development, today's conversation is all around leadership and his research in that area. So let's get into it. Don, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate you taking the time. You certainly are a world expert in regards to leadership, 2 best-selling books out, one, The Code of the Executive, and the other, High Altitude Leadership. And also you train or coach about 700 CEOs a year. And based on that, your long career in this space, I have found we're in such a unique space right now. I'd love to get your perspective in terms of really the work that you're doing. What do you think are the greatest challenges today for leaders?
Right now, there's a lot of work in supply chain, especially with inflation and how that's going to magnify supply chain impacts. From the human standpoint, though, getting a lot of commonality around talent, worrying about talent, finding it, keeping it. And part of that is remote work. So it's interesting that a lot of CEOs I find are concerned about the people thing, probably more than ever because of this mass exodus and the ability to acquire talent without having to be in the city because of the remote work issue. But it's interesting because people will come up to me in a conference or a workshop, or maybe I'm doing a workshop in a company, because I'll do a lot of those too. I'll just come in for a day and I'm able to dig down deeper. And what happens is it's like, well, people are working remotely. How do we maintain our culture? How do we maintain alignment and the passions? And then I have to remind them, like in a lot of the work that we've done in biology and anthropology and the human factor of humans, is that this is not new. And I think we forgot that we've been working remotely for thousands of years. And like all of a sudden their eyes light up. Oh, so how do you think the great armies of the world did all this, or religious groups and movements did all this? I mean, you go through, we've been working remotely for a while. I think what we forgot is, like in our standard MBA training, we have forgot how to lead humans. And what I go into then is like, how are you triggering the tribal grouping instincts that are in our species? How do you trigger the genetic influences that our body has to unite your people for power and alignment? And they have no idea how to answer that question. So what I do is, because I love teaching, so I love it when there's an opening there to learn something. So I share with them that this is how you do it. I mean, you have to think about it as a tribal environment and think about what are the symbols, what are the rituals, what's the magic? And by the magic, I mean the magic mythologies and the stories. I say crafting those allow the most powerful organizations to work remotely for thousands of years. And when we get into it, all of a sudden the lights go on, like, oh yeah. And they realize that a lot of this has been happening in their companies all along. They just didn't realize it because humans create these things naturally. It's part of our biology. It's part of our evolution. So it's interesting seeing these new challenges come up and then educating on, like, they're not new, and there's certain medical and anthropological evidence that you can use these things to grow profits, sales, and organizational performance.
Is there a place where, say I'm a leader and I'm looking for some of this research that you're talking about, are there any particular ones that you would cite or say that here's where you can get a greater understanding of?
Well, unfortunately, there's 35,000 business books published every year. It's always a shock when I tell people that. And there's none of them that I can find that you can go to. Most that we've done have been on global expeditions, remote regions, hanging out with some brilliant anthropologists and archaeologists and evolutionary psychologists. So you could probably find some good scholarly articles published by professors in anthropology, ontology, archaeology, even evolutionary psychology. I mean, Dr. David Buss is doing some remarkable work. He's running the lab now in Austin, University of Texas, Austin. And I love chatting with him. I'm really blessed to have the privilege of having people want to talk to me. So I'm really grateful that some of these really brilliant people want to hang out with me because I learned so much from them. And they like seeing the work that I'm doing too. So it's a good synergy. But I would go to those sources rather than the standard business publishing media because a lot of it's, we never got anything from that. It's somewhere else.
When I hear you, I have complete appreciation for that. Prior to going out and doing what I do now around leadership and team development, I was in the biotech industry for about 15 years. And what was interesting in that industry was that all of the things that we were providing or presenting to practitioners were around research. What was the evidence that backed up why they should choose certain procedures or treatments, that there was a reason for that? And if you didn't have the evidence to suggest why they should be doing it, then you would not go to them and ask them to do something. And I think leadership is very much the same way. The research is so vibrant in terms of providing understanding of human nature and influence and how we make decisions, that if we just tap into that, it's not sort of made up. There is a path that we can follow.
Yeah. And I think the longevity of theory is one indicator. What we found is that a lot of top management theories that would last maybe 5 to 10 years, maybe less, maybe a few years, and then the references to them fall off because they're very trendy.
Yeah.
They sound very exciting. Everybody reads the books. They start using the lingo. They look cool. They think they're smart. But I like to see things that have been working for centuries. I like to see things that have been, 1,000 years old and that can be validated in biology, as you're mentioning. A lot of stuff can be validated with medical and biological research on our species. And it makes sense now. Oh, here's why that's working. And here's why it'll work tomorrow. So you have a good point that we should use more evidence-based approaches to management theory.
I see it especially in healthcare, where it's an industry that prides itself on evidence-based medicine. I said there's evidence-based behaviors in terms of how you can create better cultures and environments that you can tap into as well, just like you do for how you've treated individuals. The same is available for you to understand how do you create better cultures, better teams.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I think that's the area we should be focusing more. And that's what we try to do, is we try to make sure that it's validated, which is why I like to visit these remote regions in the world, because if it's working naturally or working in these lost or remote civilizations, there must be something biological about it. When we come back and apply it in companies, it works. Sales go up, performance goes up. People think, wow, you guys are geniuses. It's like, no, we're just asking different questions. That's all. I mean, the people doing this are the geniuses. We're just observing and trying to learn from them.
So along those lines, is there anything in particular for you as you have gone out globally and come across a behavior or a system within a tribal organization that you've said, boy, this wasn't something we expected, or you bring it back here and you really see the relevance of this, how impactful it can be?
Yeah, I think it's what I found when I looked at the autopsies. I mean, we started looking at successful companies, and then we found a couple of problems. One is when they went bankrupt, most bankrupt companies have all the best-selling books on their shelves and have seen all the TED Talks and have done all the neat things that we think you should do to be a good leader. And I'm wondering, why did they go bankrupt? That's a piece of evidence which I think should be explored further. When we got into that, we began to realize, and even the biggest companies hire the authors as they went bankrupt. So I'm like, wait a minute, like you came from a biological background. I mean, if you had a procedure that was causing this level of death, you would probably say, maybe we shouldn't do that anymore.
Right.
But in management theory, we just keep doing it. So we started looking at the autopsies and found out something really, really, really interesting. And it had to do, and I came out with a book I wrote with Chris Warner. And like, he's probably the top rescue climber in the world. And you might have seen him on CNN when there's a mountaineering disaster. He's the go-to guy. But he's led hundreds of the most dangerous expeditions. And I was climbing with Chris on a couple, and we did a book together. And I found that when he did the NBC special, we wrote a book called High Altitude Leadership. while he was doing the Death Mountain of K2 and filming it for NBC. And an interesting thing came out when he was pulling dead climbers off of mountains or finding body parts of dead climbers. It turns out that we realized as we were writing the book live that climbers are clutching their tools. In other words, they get seduced by their tools. They have too much confidence. They don't listen to their guides. I mean, there's a number of reasons, but I said, interesting, on the autopsies of dead companies, they're clutching their tools too. So we think tool seduction is one of the things I thought was interesting as we went around to look at these environments. I think too many companies aren't using their tools. The tools are using them.
That's really interesting. Along those lines, and again, a lot of the work that when I go out to organizations, I will talk about it in terms of, I think intellectually, a lot of people understand the models, the whatever, the pop stuff, but it's the application that gets lost, right? They intellectually say, yeah, we understand this, but they don't apply it as well. They don't do the thing. So if I'm prescribing, you can intellectually understand why this is important for me to do this, but if you don't do it, then how can you expect to get healthier?
Yeah, that's what we found is that we have 35,000 new books with great tools. Here's what you got to do to be a great leader or have a great company, and here's how you do it. So it's a lot of good what and how tool stuff. But when it comes to, does any of this alter human decision, there's like a vacuum. And that's the point. I think we load up with thousands of books, which are great tools. I love the tools. I'm an MIT geek, so of course I'm going to enjoy tools. But it's that it doesn't influence human decision. And that's really where results occur and the behavior shifts and the decision shifts that occur with people. So the failure rate we found in autopsies had nothing to do with the tools. It was just that it was an alter human decision. So these companies are going bankrupt, clutching on to their latest, greatest theories, best-selling books and all that. And so it took us in a whole different direction. And that allowed us to really increase the success rate of strategic planning and culture change and sales. But it was really around looking at how do you alter human decision, which is really altering human belief. And when you get into altering human belief, there's a vacuum of information out there in the main business or genre. But when you get into other areas, it's very clear what's going on. And so I think belief management is a lost art in business education. And when we start altering the beliefs of people, we see organizational performance go up. So that's one insight we got that has really helped us a lot.
Do you think at times, though, CEOs, those that have reached the top, right, they're at senior leadership levels, become resistant because there's this false belief that they've figured it out? They don't need to learn anymore, that the highest level of their organization for a reason, so they have the answers.
There are those out there. They're not our clients. Because one of the filters is if you think you already know everything, then we can't help you. You know what I mean? But fortunately, most CEOs are wanting to learn, wanting to push, wanting to reach out, wanting to innovate, wanting to question the answers and derive some sort of competitive advantage from the ability to be intuitively stronger in the markets they want to penetrate and what they want to win in that market. So it's hard to do all that when you think you know everything and then innovation stops and just There are some CEOs out there like that think they're it, but it's fine. I mean, if they can continue to have people that want to work for them, that's great. And if they can continue growing the company, that's great. But most CEOs are learners and want to push themselves farther. And we like working with those.
Over the last decade, for you and research that you have done from a standpoint of followers and their needs, have you noticed any shifts, any changes? Certainly, I think we hear things like the Great Resignation or quiet quitting today, which, again, I think those are nice buzzwords. I don't really believe that those things haven't been going on well before COVID, but I'm just curious from your standpoint, do you see any difference that's happening in regards to that relationship between leader and follower?
I think the basic principles are still there. I think that with this whole mass resignation and remote work area and the whole COVID impact of causing that has just brought to light the importance of it all. Because it's one thing if the leader is not able to engage followers, align their beliefs for something that has some passion and a willingness to group together, to need each other, to achieve something wonderful, and be willing even to suffer and sacrifice together. I mean, that's where really the great game exists, is organizing humans to achieve. But if it's just business as usual, you're making money, you don't notice, you kind of get dull unless you have someone come in and knock you upside the head. You don't know there's a problem until there are options for the followers. What happened, I think, with the resignation phase we've been through is the options emerged. All of a sudden, it's like, what just happened? Nothing just happened. It's always been there. Now you're realizing, oh, do I have a compelling saga? That's what we call it. We stole it from the Vikings. Do I have a purpose with so much passion? Not like your standard motivational mission statement or why statement, just something more, something around my people rally for what's ahead. Because it's formidable. We need each other and we're willing to suffer and sacrifice for it and have fun in the winning of it all. Yeah. But those questions never get asked. It's like, well, yeah, we have a mission statement. It's hung up on the wall. It's on our business cards. Yeah, we have a value statement. We have that on a poster. But that's like it. That's as far as they go. And then all of a sudden, somebody opens the door and says he wants to leave. And everybody starts running for the door. It's like, wait a minute. I read all the hot books, all the best-selling books. We checked all the boxes. What happened? It's like, oh, God.
There was some work done. Let's see, it was back in, I think, 2008 or 2009. It was by neuroscientist Dr. David Rock. And he came up with a model called SCARF, which are 5 social needs that he had identified that were really important in terms of creating this reward versus avoidant behaviors. And one of them in there was relatedness. The R in the SCARF model was around relatedness and our need to feel connection to a group. And when I hear you talking about that tribal feeling or that connection to a group, to me, I think that is such an important driver in the world that we're in right now. If you want to attract and certainly retain the best people, it's creating that environment where people feel as though they are connected to those people that they're with.
Yeah, and that exists. And unfortunately, we're seeing it so much more in the Ukraine-Russian conflict, who's following leaders that have a passion for something ahead and willing to suffer together. And you see the camaraderie and the relating in one of the most intense teaming experience ever.
Yeah.
That. So throughout history, this has always been the case. I think that's a good thing to look at. Yes.
Yeah. As I hear you talk about that, is one that shows I am with you, not above you. As we talk about tribalism and that importance, how do you introduce that with CEOs? Or are there those that sort of question, maybe there's too much of a stretch there in regards to where the data is coming from or how it fits with me in an organization when you're talking about something that's going on around the world? How do you align those?
I start backwards. I kind of run them through the data first, the high failure rate management theory. It really exposes a lot what they've been experiencing anyway. So it's not like it's a new idea. It's like, oh, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that's my life. So I kind of pull out the issues and the pain and the suffering that generally they're experiencing anyway. And then we get into the ancient models and then like belief-driven models. And so when we get down to the tribal thing, it's not a big leap. It's like, hey, there's 5 ways to alter beliefs of humans. And one of them is to create that kind of environment where your symbols, rituals, and your magic supports your compelling saga. And that's how you start aligning humans. So I kind of work it through because I love to teach and I like to work it through. When that happens, it's like a blinding flash of the obvious. It's like, is that like, well, I got to think about this or research this or question this. It's like, this isn't hitting you in the face like a head slap, like I should have known this or I knew it and I forgot this. Then I didn't do it right. I didn't teach it right. But it should show up obvious, not like a new idea.
Along those lines, are there any behaviors that you would say you have identified as sort of timeless as leaders?
I think one of the behaviors is creating something. And this is one of the things that I teach in our workshops. I try to shift the beliefs of the audience in different ways that might help them apply what's going on. And one of the things that people come up to me and say they really value is to realize that followers don't follow leaders. And this came out when Apple started using our research. Then my colleague, Cameron Lugman, we had done a lot of samurai work over the years. And he went there to pioneer their innovation program in terms of how does the brain work around creativity and innovation. And in that process, I realized that Steve Jobs had died and they wrote books about Steve. And what were their opinion of Steve's leadership behavior?
Not favorable.
It's like answer I hear all the time when I ask that question. It's like, it's a freaking asshole. He basically violates like everything
right
on a management's goal. And
all $35,000.
Exactly. So I'm like, how do you teach a class in leadership today when you have to start off with saying, look, everything I'm going to teach is probably irrelevant because the guy that violated everything I'm going to teach you created the most powerful company in the world. It's like, that's a good way to start the class because it opens up new questions. And what we did is we went to look at that. And I found Steve wasn't alone. I mean, there were a lot of great leaders who were assholes. And I don't want to train people to be assholes, although I'm maybe a little late for a few. But what I'm trying to look at is what's going on. I mean, General Patton was an ass. And I think Forbes published an article some years ago on how jerks are great leaders or something like that. I forget, and I have a list of names. They just published like Mother Teresa was an ass. I mean, what Mother Teresa was? You can Google it. But anyway, what I was realizing is that followers aren't following leaders. And that's why we're teaching leadership all wrong, because these are assholes. Nobody would follow them. But what they're following is the story, the compelling saga that they represent. And so followers follow the story the leader represents, the compelling saga that they're up to. And I think once we got that, we were able to transform a lot of companies and a lot of organizations that have been stuck in this leadership vacuum and realize, why is this all not working? And so when they get it, I think CEOs are kind of relieved, like, you know what, I got to go. I have to find a story that I'm into, that I can represent, that my people will follow. I mean, you could be a nice person and say they want to follow you because they like you. And that's not a winning formula. That's a nice little country club experience, but it's not like, yeah, great guy, great woman, this is great. I'll follow her. Yeah, because they're so nice. No. What's the story? What does winning mean? And how are you going to do it? See, that's what people could rally around.
I know the stories behind Steve Jobs in regards to people saying, look, he breaks every rule that you would think about transformational, servant, whatever type of label you want to put on it. He is the anti of that. But also not everybody has a product that Apple has, right? In terms of
not yet
rallying behind. Yeah. Those are exceptions to the rules and not the rules. And I guess to your point is those are the ones that maybe understood how to tell a story. And certainly he did a great job of that.
Yeah. I mean, they
behind.
And wanted to put a dent in the universe. And when we went back and started seeing these small companies that rose up to dominate their markets, even though all the experts and thought leaders and management consultants said they're never going to make it, and yet they rise up and dominate the world. I'm like, wow, what just happened? Well, the leader had a story. Jobs wanted to put a dent in the universe. We were looking at FedEx as an example, and there's some really, I was talking to FedEx employees, and this was in the Wall Street Journal about 20 years ago. It's like, no, we're going to rally these red, white, and blue trucks to go up against UPS, the brown shirts. It's like he made it like a red, white, and blue against the brown shirts thing. Just created a story. I mean, UPS are great guys, but he needed something to rally people. And in fact, in my workshop, I've got like, I don't know, a dozen examples, maybe 20 of these, where companies created a story that was either against an enemy or to achieve an ideal or to solve a problem, and they rallied around that. Now, the leader could have been a great leader or not a nice person, but they weren't following that leader. They were following what they were up to. And I think we should teach that more in leadership, and we don't.
That is fascinating. I remember hearing some story about FedEx and the creator of FedEx that in business school, I think, received a D on a proposal for a FedEx type of, right?
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
Right?
Story.
Is that something along those lines? So fascinating.
I mean, look at Southwest. Everybody said they're not going to make it. Amazon, all the industry experts and thought leaders, and go, no, they're not going to make it. Now, all of a sudden, they all shut up because they made it.
Yeah.
And they changed their market. So I was always curious on, when I did the autopsies, I was also curious around how do these companies that all the consultants say is not going to happen, they're not going to make it, and they end up making it. So what happened? And I think it had to do with intuition. They were out-intuiting the enemy, and they rallied around a story that inspired the people. So coming back to followership, I think the leader has to realize it's not about me, it's about what I'm up to. And I need to rally people around that.
Interesting, which is a complete shift in terms of really, again, 35,000 books, as you mentioned. I don't think there's probably anybody talking about you got to work on this on the Saga first.
Yeah.
So along those lines, if somebody wants to hear more about the work that you do or some of the research that's involved in this and your approach, what's the best way to do that?
I can just go to our website. I'm trying to coordinate everything through that. And we've got some new things coming out. But yes, Saga Leadership. S as in Sam, AGA, like the Viking Saga, sagaleadership.com. Yeah, we try to keep everything there and got some new stuff coming up, a new book on entrepreneurship that's going to talk about the power of losing, not winning, but the power of losing as a way to become a great winner. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back on the show when that's out to discuss that book. I think you're, again, taking a fascinating approach to how we normally look at losing. It's not a positive.
Right.
So, Don, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. I'm thinking right now about story as we end this. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Wishing you all the best. If you found my podcast episodes or my perspectives to be beneficial in your own leadership development or to the development of your team, I'd love the opportunity to have a discussion with you about how the approaches that I outline in my book, The Leadership Bridge, how to engage your employees and drive organizational excellence, can help you and your organization to attract, develop, and retain the best talent. If that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to reach out to me at patrick@emeryleadershipgroup.com. And that's EMERY leadershipgroup.com. I hope we have an opportunity to talk and explore how I can help you and your organization rise above your best.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast listening platform. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time, keep rising above your best as a leader.